the Indianapolis Colts. But unfortunately, they, for lack of a better phrase, laid a goose egg last year. It was not a good year for them as they went 4-12-1, let go of head coach Frank Reich midway through the season, and they brought in Jeff Saturday, which they did win the game, his first game there, but then afterwards, I don't remember they won very much. Nonetheless, they lost Jeff. I forget they let him go. He's obviously not the head coach anymore. He may still have a role within the building. But they also lost quarterbacks, Matt Ryan, who was supposed to be the starting guy, and also Nick Foles, and then also wide receiver Paris Campbell. They lost him in free agency, as well as on the defensive side of the ball, lost edge rusher Yannick Ngakoue, traded away cornerback Stephon Gilmore to your Cowboys, and then lost safety Rodney McLeod. And then addition-wise, they did bring in head coach Shane Steichen. He was the defensive coordinator of the Eagles, as well as Shane was, I think, offensive coordinator, excuse me. Quarterback Gardner Minshew, because it makes sense bringing him over from that previous system. And then wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie and edge rusher Samson Ebukam. And then draft-wise, obviously they went out and grabbed quarterback Anthony Richardson from Florida in the first round, cornerback Julius Brents from Kansas State in the second round, and then wide receiver Josh Downs out of North Carolina in round 3. So, John, your thoughts on the Colts and if they can bounce back this year?
All right. So the interesting thing about the Colts last year is, and that I was very. I said many times that I thought they were intentionally tanking, because if you looked at how they start their season, they start with a tie against the Texans.
That was a shock.
Yeah, then they lose to the Jaguars. But then they beat the Chiefs. So the first 3 games was a roller coaster. It's like you tie the Texans, and then people still thought the Jaguars were bad at that point because, they just come off having the number 1 overall pick 2 years in a row. Yeah. So they're like, oh, you lose to Jacksonville, but then you beat Kansas City? Like, whoa. But then they lose to Tennessee by 7. Then they beat the Broncos. So they were like at the start of the season, then they beat the Jaguars in the rematch. So they were 3-2-1 through their first 6 games. Then they go and lose to the Titans. Then they beat the Commanders. 4-3-1 to start the season. Or sorry, they didn't beat the Commanders. They lost to the Commanders. So they were 3-4-1. Then they lose to the Patriots 3-5-1. And then they beat the Raiders. So they were 4-5-1, which isn't great. But in that division, they were on pace to potentially win the division. Now, that said, that Raiders win, like you just mentioned, was the one where Jeff Saturday was in. Because after that 3-game stretch of losing to the Colts, Commanders, and Patriots, which, mind you, not the Colts, the Titans. They lost to the Titans. That Titans loss was only by 9 points. The Commanders loss was by 1 point. And the Patriots loss, they did get kind of blown out. But that 3-game stretch is where they fired Frank Reich. And then they brought in Jeff Saturday. They beat the Raiders. And then to end the year, they lose 7 straight games. So, I don't know. It was a very strange season for the Colts. I don't think they're were actually as bad as their record would indicate. I also think that maybe, even myself probably overhyped them last year. A lot of people felt like they were a quarterback away from being a true contender. Matt Ryan wasn't quite the quarterback that people really wanted him to be. But I think I don't remember how I felt, but it felt like, maybe he could be an upgrade over Carson Wentz. It proved not to be the case. I don't know. They were just an absolute mess. And so I like the fact that they're at least doing a clean restart. I didn't at the time agree with the firing of Frank Reich, but I'm just glad they didn't keep Jeff Saturday as the full-time coach, because it just felt like he kind of skipped the line in terms of things that he needed to do to actually earn that job. And, it is what it is. Anyway, so in the offseason, they didn't really, add any big pieces. In fact, most of the pieces they lost were the big ones, losing the coach, you lose Ngakoue, you lose Gilmore. But then in the draft was kind of where they really added the pieces that you can see, like, all right, they're building towards the future with Anthony Richardson, who's a quarterback that a lot of people, myself included, feel is going to take some time to truly develop. I don't know if I necessarily agree with the decision as of right now that he's the day 1 starter. I figured you're going to bring in a guy like Gardner Minshew. It might be worth sitting Anthony Richardson for at least a few games so you can start to get film on how the other defenses are going to approach your team. It also doesn't help that the whole Jonathan Taylor thing is happening, which we already talked about last episode, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. But it sounds more and more each day like Jonathan Taylor is going to be gone, which is going to make life even harder for Richardson. I don't know. It'll be very interesting to see how the Colts look offensively this year. Defensively, I think that they can still be somewhat decent. Shaq Leonard was dealing with injuries almost the entire season last year. We still know DeForest Buckner's a stud. You and I were both very high in Kwity Paye, and he had some really good moments last year. Kenny Moore is a really solid slot corner. So they have some pieces, certainly. But at the end of the day, I don't know. I don't know how to feel about this team, considering that, there's just a lot of things that have changed. And with Jonathan Taylor gone, feels like you lose your one true premier weapon, because they have a lot of good receivers, but I wouldn't say they have like a premier receiver. And then the offensive line still has question marks. I mean, Braden Smith, Ryan Kelly, and Quentin Nelson at one point a couple of years ago were looking like the best offensive line in the league.
The blue wall.
The Costanzo retired their left tackle, so they drafted Bernard Raymond, and he had an okay year last year. So, maybe he could progress coming into this next season, and maybe the whole line as a group can really fix what happened last year, because it was pretty pitiful, to be honest. And I don't think they just magically got bad at football. They were a really, really good offensive line for a couple of years there, and all of a sudden they're just bad. I don't buy it. I think they'll be fine this year. They were dealing with some injuries last year. The Matt Ryan thing wasn't great. Obviously the coaching staff changes weren't great. And like I said, I think at the end of the year, the Colts were actually trying to lose. But it is what it is. So I don't know how to feel about the Colts. I don't think they're a playoff team. But I don't think they'll be the worst team in the league. They could be if some of those issues like the offensive line don't end up getting fixed and somehow they are still bad. But I think they have enough bright spots like Buckner, like Paye, like the offensive line to at least be somewhat relevant for the early to mid part of the season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this is going to be a hovering 500 team. I'm not with you in regards to Anthony Richardson. I'm fine with. I'm more on the fence of just start him, get those reps. Underway, let him experience them, make his. I'm always fine with just let him make his mistakes, and then if he learns from them, great. If not, then okay, at least you get that out of the way sooner. It does suck though, like you mentioned, Jonathan Taylor, because that would have been. It would have been. I would have considered them more as maybe a playoff threat if they had that. Because obviously, if they had Jonathan Taylor wanted to play for the Colts, it would, looking on paper, this team would be a very interesting matchup, because we know the defense has been really good in the past 2 years. And as you mentioned, last year was really just, unfortunately, the offense kind of dropping the ball. But with Richardson and Taylor, and if Shane Steichen's going to bring the similar style of offense from Philly over to Indy, in theory, we would expect them to take better care of the ball, and the offense just to be better in terms of the fact that it would probably be a little bit more conservative statistically, running the ball with the option between Richardson and Taylor, and then maybe take a couple of shots to Alec Pierce and or Michael Pittman, and they could still do that. It's just not as scary, especially the run game, the read option game, when you have to worry about either Jonathan Taylor getting the ball or Anthony Richardson, because we know Richardson's a great athlete himself. So it's gonna be interesting, because by default it's gonna rely a little bit more on Richardson probably throwing the ball this year, which is a major concern in regards to him being consistent, because I know we probably talked about it draft wise, but that was one of the few issues. It was one game he looked great, and then the next game his accuracy would be all over the place, his timing and such. So we'll see how it goes for the offense. And then I'm not gonna mention too much on the defense. Is pretty much as Buckner's been healthy, so as long as he's there, it's great. And then it's even better if, like you mentioned, if Shaquille Leonard, if he's healthy, then this is still going to be at least a top 10-ish defense, though, with the style that they play. And hopefully for them, they can finally get a secondary guy, a secondary pass rusher like a Kwity Paye, who they drafted a couple of years ago, to kind of be another difference maker for them. Because while they've been a really great defense, they haven't been a truly elite, gotta have in moments defense late in the year. They haven't had many other guys make plays. So other than that, like you mentioned, hopefully just a year where they can build, see what they got going forward, maybe receiver wise, obviously with Anthony Richardson, and see if this offensive line can bounce back, which, like I said, I'm with you. They should. It's not like age happened, or maybe it was just a bad year. A couple of them had some down years, and like you said, maybe injuries. So we'll see if the Indianapolis Colts can bounce back, and obviously we'll see what happens with Jonathan Taylor. If they're able to offload him before the season starts, or if the season does start, that whole cloud, if will he play, will he not, and then if he doesn't, how long do they hold out until making a deal to ship him out of town? So
also, just one more interesting storyline too is this is Michael Pittman's last year under contract. So, could be a year where maybe he really balls out and shows that he deserves a big one, or I don't know, just something to monitor throughout the years. He is on a contract year.
Or maybe, if they do get rid of Jonathan Taylor, and then maybe they say, well, maybe they feel they're a year or two away. Well, maybe we don't extend him, and maybe we ship him for they'll have to make that decision. Yeah, interesting decision for him to pay him or not. And
I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest, around the trade deadline if he's maybe a name that is being actively brought up.
Yeah, because